This is the new Radiomaster T8L, and it is a low-cost ExpressLRS RC controller for FPV, drones, planes, and whatever you want. And what is interesting about this radio isn't just the fact that it has ExpressLRS built in, it's the fact that it's available for under $35. Now, in this video, we're going to give you a complete overview of this radio. We're going to give you a look at how you actually configure it, because you will see that there is no screen here. We're going to tear it down, take it for a flight, and then at the very end, I'm going to share with you my thoughts. Before we get into it though, I just need to be clear in saying that Radiomaster did send me this radio over to take a look at for free. However, they've not paid me to make this video. They've not seen this video before it's been published, and as always, my thoughts are entirely my own. The first thing you will notice about this radio is the fact that there is no display. As I've said, it does have ExpressLRS built in and it supports up to 100 milliwatts of RF power, but it isn't running Edge TX. Instead, to configure this radio, you plug it in via the USB-C port on the top and you use Radiomaster's web-based configurator. That configurator allows you to not only set the radio up, configure the ExpressLRS system, but also update the firmware as well. Don't worry though, you don't have to plug this radio in to bind it, because it has a dedicated bind button down here for the ExpressLRS system. So whilst you may want to configure it, once you've done that configuration, when you're out in the field, you don't have to worry. You can bind the radio very simply by the push of a button. Now, you may be thinking that this radio does look very familiar, and that is because it is very similar to this. However, before I talk about that, I want to talk about the price. Clearly, Radiomaster are aiming this radio at new users, and it is being priced as such as well. So for instance, internationally, this radio is going to be priced at $34.99 US. That is incredible value, and it makes it a no-brainer starter radio for new users, a spare radio for existing users, or just a cheap radio for sim use. However, I also think it makes a very nice alternative to this, the DJI FPV Remote, a radio I have never recommended anyone buys. Whilst it is convenient to use with the DJI O3 and O4 system, I always recommend that you use your own RC system, and at this pricing, it makes it a no-brainer choice when it comes to getting a cheap radio to get you up and running. Obviously, this radio has all of the main controls you would expect to find on an RC. So we have two gimbals. These gimbals are Hall effect. They have quad bearings and they have removable sticks that hide in the back of the radio down here. With regards to the rest of the controls on the front, we have a power button that allows us to turn the radio on. So if I press and hold, you can see it powers up. And then we've got 4 LED indicators along here that tell us the battery level. Next to this, we have a multifunction button. This button is used for putting the radio into the configuration mode, but it is also used for the ExpressLRS pairing as well. By pressing and holding this for 2 seconds, it will shove the radio into binding mode, again, allowing you to bind it whilst out in the field. Then in the middle, we have our hoop for our lanyard, as well as our trim buttons. Something nice about the trims on this is they actually light up to tell you their status. So at the moment, the trims are centered. However, if I push one up and one down, you can see that the buttons have now lit up, indicating that they're not in the center position. You can reset them by simply pushing them back into the place they were in, or alternatively, if you just move them off to where you want them and want to reset them, you can press and hold the button, which will then reset it back to the center as well. Moving around to the top of the radio, here you will find the main controls. So starting in the top left corner, we have what is the SE button. This is a 2-position latching button. This is our arm button, which is on the corner. We then have SA and SD. These are momentary buttons, but they are electronic buttons, and these are actually fully configurable in the software, allowing you to use them as momentary buttons, but you can also use them as latching buttons as well. And in fact, you can set them to be double press for latching for a safety feature. You've then got 2 3-position switches for SB and SC, These rockers move between 3 different positions. And then finally, on the back right corner, we've got S1, which is a potentiometer. Whilst S1 doesn't have a noticeable mechanical indent, it does have a digital one beeping when you hit the center. Also on the top, you will find the USB-C port. This is a multifunction port, not only for charging the batteries, but also doing the configuration and updating the firmware. Alongside no screen, you'll also notice that there is no external antenna on this radio, and instead it's built in, I'm assuming, along the top here, but we'll have a closer look at that when we do the teardown. Moving around to the rear, and this is where you will find your sticks. These simply slot into the back of the radio and are held in place. These sticks are actually stainless steel threads with plastic inserts on the top. You have the crown as well as some spikes around the sides, and these offer a nice amount of grip depending on if you're a thumber or a pincher. Under the rubber grips on the back is where you will find the batteries. This radio actually is powered from 2 18650 cells. Radiomaster have included some rechargeable ones with the radio that I've got here. However, they may not be included with the radio that you purchase, and you should check if you do need to order batteries when placing your order. Just to mention, under this battery on this side, you will also find that there looks to be a separate power input. It isn't clear what voltage this takes, and it is mounted directly to the board, but there is an input there available, so I'm guessing you could put a bigger battery on this if you wanted to, but we'll have to have a word with Radiomaster to understand what that's about. Under each grip, you can also find the tension adjustment for the gimbals. We have a horizontal and a vertical adjustment for each gimbal available on the back, which is nice and means that you don't have to take the radio apart to make any adjustments. Now, when it comes to the ergonomics and the feel of the T8L, I have to say it's got a real nice weight to it. It's not the lightest radio in the world. It's not the heaviest either. Those 18650 cells, though, put a nice bit of weight on the handset. The plastics certainly don't feel cheap. They're a bit like the DJI plastics on their radios. It's quite hard, actually. Ergonomics-wise, on the gimbals, for a thumber, it is fine. The gimbals feel nice and solid. They do have a tiny bit of flex on them, but that should be expected for a full plastic gimbal. Certainly not the worst that I've ever felt. Not the best. The AG01 and AG2 is the best, but these are up there with the gimbals on the likes of the Pocket. I'd actually say they're a bit better than the gimbals on the Pocket, so that gives you a bit of a baseline. Moving over to the buttons, so I can reach the arm switch, no problem at all. It's really nicely placed, in fact. I'd have no problems flying an emergency disarm with that. The top shoulder buttons are fine. They do take a bit of a move up of the fingers, but that's no problem at all. Next, we have the wheel, and this is probably the worst one because it is a plastic wheel. It has detents on every step. It's not completely smooth. It does notch. There's no bigger detent for the center position. As I've shown earlier, it has a beep, but because it's plastic and it is quite smooth, you can't instantly turn it like that. It's certainly not going to move itself, but I am finding I need to put a bit of pressure on it to move it. So if I was flying and I wanted to move it, you can. It's certainly doable, but it doesn't have the very lightweight dexterity that you may have on some wheels. You've got to put a bit of pressure on it to get it to move, and as a result of those quite heavy detents and it being plastic, it is quite easy to slip across the surface of it. Finally, moving up to the switches on the top, I have mixed feelings on these because if I just go into thumbing mode, they are not easily reachable. You can do it, but it isn't particularly comfortable. It's the same with that one there. I can switch between the back two okay, but I wouldn't easily get it up to the top one. With regards to thumbs, I can reach them if I twist my hands around a bit. What I would say is they don't feel like I can instantly get to them. If I wanted to change mode very quickly, I feel like I'd have to take my hand off the stick. I can do it. So if I'm flying like that and I can go there, you can see we can switch there, but that really isn't comfortable. And if I was a thumber like that, I can do it, but I don't feel I have massive dexterity over it. If I wanted to be able to switch mode very quickly in a emergency situation, I would personally map that to the SD on a double tap or something like that, rather than rely on being able to reach those switches. It's not that I can't reach them, I can, but it is a bit of a stretch. It certainly isn't comfortable. When it comes to binding on this radio, the simplest way to do it is via the dedicated binding button. You can, though, also put your own dedicated binding phrase on, and I'll show you how to do that later on in the video. But what we'll do next is give you a quick overview of how quick and easy it is to bind to something that is already running ExpressLRS. We're going to use the 3 power method and the binding button on the remote, and that should get us linked nice and easily. For this video, we're going to bind it to this GoFilm 20 from Cadex. It's worth me mentioning that this is already bound to one of my existing radios using a binding phrase. So to do this, we're going to use the plug-in 3 times method. However, if you get yourself a brand new ExpressLRS receiver or a new drone, it may come ready to bind and you wouldn't need to do this 3 power method of forcing the receiver into binding mode. It will simply depend on how your receiver comes from the factory. So what we're going to do is plug this in quickly 3 times to put it in binding mode. So I'm just going to look at it. 1, 2, 3. And by doing that, our receiver should now enter binding mode. I'm just going to look for the LEDs just to see if I can see them on the board. So now it's flashing twice, which should be a good sign. Then I'm going to press and hold bind button on the radio, release, and what should happen is the 2 will link. There we go. The LED on the radio has gone solid and our radio is now connected to our drone. Then if I plug in my USB port and connect to Betaflight, we then should see this being reflected on our receiver, just like it would be on any normal ExpressLRS or any other radio for that matter. And we can then do our normal configuration as you would with any radio. Now, obviously, as there's no screen on this, you're going to need to configure it via the Web UI configuration screen. What I'm going to do next is give you an overview of how that works and show you all of the options that are available. To put the radio in the right mode for configuration, all you need to do is press and hold the M and the power button at the same time for 2 seconds. When you do this, the radio will power itself on, and then it will be in the correct configuration mode, and then we simply need to take our USB-C cable to our computer and plug it in to the USB port on the top. The first time you do this, your computer will need to install the correct drivers for the radio. When you are in the correct mode, it should come up and show the COM port as the following. Once that's done, we're then able to navigate to the Radiomaster web-based configurator. The web address for this will be linked to in the description, but it is simply radiomaster-rm-web-page/connection.htm. Once we've gone to the correct page, you should then have the option in the center to allow us to connect to the radio. So what we're going to do is click connect. We're going to select our radio from the list. So you can see it says Radiomaster T8L COM41 paired. Click connect, and this will then open up the main configuration options. In here, you can find everything for both the radio controls as well as ExpressLRS. There are multiple tabs along the top, so we have device, channels, RF settings, calibration and firmware update. We have some status information up here as well, and then in the middle we have our basic information and our configuration. Starting on the device tab, you can see we have the main device information. We have some key mode settings for our switches. So for instance, SA, B, C, D and E. The nice thing within here is for SA and SD, these are the digital switches, the momentary buttons, but these are fully configurable. They can be click, which is momentary. They can be single press latching or double press latching. And the nice thing about this is that you can use one of these as a safety switch feature as a double press for arming. Below this, we then have some basic settings for the radio. So we have our volume, our S1 mid-tone. Our S1 is our wheel, so what tone we want when we reach the midpoint. We've got receiver loss warning as well as low power warning, reset trim function, our serial numbers, our ExpressLRS firmware version, as well as our device firmware versions. Next, we have our channel settings, and within here, we have our channel monitor, our channel settings, mapping, trims and sub-trims, and modes. In the monitor, you can see this just gives us a direct representation of our channels. Channel settings, again, allows us to do all of the basic channel configuration. So you've got your normal direction, your travel settings, and that representing on this side of the screen. We've got our channel mapping options, so what your channels are specifically mapped to, as well as your additional up to 10 channels and their mapping configuration. You've got your trim and sub-trim settings, and then your mode settings for your radio itself, allowing you to switch between mode 1, 2, 3, and 4. Under RF settings, you will basically find the same main configuration settings that you would find in the ExpressLRS Lua script. We have our power settings, which we can set between 10, 25, 50, and 100 milliwatts. We have the dynamic power option, which we can turn on or off or configure to a switch. We have the ability to enable Wi-Fi on the built-in transmitter or on the receiver if connected. We have our packet rate settings, allowing us to select between 50 and F1000 Hz, our telemetry ratio settings, our switch mode settings, as well as our model match settings. You will notice under here that there is no option for the ExpressLRS binding phrase. That is still part of the main ExpressLRS configuration, as it would be with any normal ExpressLRS radio. If you wanted to configure your binding phrase, you would simply need to enable the Wi-Fi, then connect to the access point on the radio and type in your binding phrase as you would normally. You can, though, trigger binding from within here as well. However, as I have already mentioned, you do have a dedicated binding button on the front of the radio. Calibration is where you have the option to calibrate your sticks on your radio as well as your switches. So here you can see as I'm moving the sticks, the calibration is showing on the screen. And then you can simply start or reset calibration from this window. Then under firmware update, you have the option to select updating the controller, the internal ExpressLRS module, or the sensor module. Alongside the button binding, you can also do the binding phrase option just like you can on any normal ExpressLRS system. You simply need to put the radio into Wi-Fi and then do the configuration via the web UI. And I'll give you a quick demo of how you do that on this radio next. To do this, you're going to need to put the radio into Wi-Fi mode, and you can enable this from the web-based configurator for the radio. So just like before, we're going to press and hold both of the buttons to put the radio into connection mode, and then we're going to plug in our USB-C. Once your radio is connected and you're on the main device page, click on RF settings and then click on enable Wi-Fi. Once you've done this, the radio will start to beep to signify that it is in Wi-Fi mode. Once connected to Wi-Fi, you should open your browser and go to 10.0.0.1, and this will take you to the web interface homepage on the ExpressLRS transmitter. From here, you have the option to set your own custom binding phrase under the binding phrase setting. Once you've configured this, you then simply need to click save. Okay, so just to do a couple of quick little flights on this remote to give you an idea of how it feels. Now, I'll mention this a little bit more later on. Something I have done after playing with it a little bit on the sim is rub the top of the stick ends on my desk on the bench. They're a little bit sharp and digging into my fingers. Nothing terrible, but I did just need to dumb them down a little bit just to make sure that they weren't as sharp as they came from the factory. So this is something you may wish to consider. But other than that, that's about it. Now it is worth bearing in mind that this radio does have a built-in antenna, which means it's not going to have the same range as a normal ExpressLRS system. It is only 250 milliwatts of RF power. Oh, this battery's flat. I'm going to bring it in to swap it. So you do need to take that into account as well. So that is obviously going to have an impact on the kind of range that you can get from it with this transmitter, but ExpressLRS is still fantastic. It's still going to outdo pretty much everything else that is out there on the market. And for the kind of use case this radio is designed for, I really don't expect it to be an issue, and most people will have no problems at all. I've also spent some time with this radio in the sim. To do this, it's really straightforward. You simply turn the radio on, connect the USB, and then in whatever sim you've chosen, it should appear under the controller settings. Here we have it in liftoff. It's been detected, no problem at all. And then if you want to spend a bit of time flying around Bardwell's yard, no problem. Makes a nice little sim radio actually, but again, and whilst it doesn't have a screen and every button in the world, it's also a good basic radio for out in the field as well. Okay, finally, we need to do our teardown. Now, what we're going to do is remove our sticks first of all, and then we're going to unpeel the covers off the back for the batteries, and then get out our two 18650s, which are held in place quite tightly, actually. They're not hard to get out, but they certainly wouldn't fall out even if you had just the back cover on. With regards to getting this radio apart, I can see screw, 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 screw. So I can see 4 so far. I'm not seeing much else hiding under there. We're going to undo these 4. And then hopefully the handset will come apart. Most people shouldn't need to take this radio apart because all of the configuration for the gimbals is available on the back, so you shouldn't need to do too much with regards to tearing down. However, that isn't to say it isn't beneficial to have an understanding of what is going on. You're then going to carefully pop that forward. Plastic screw, the screws into the plastic are biting a little bit. Oh, a couple fell through the holes inside. Okay, so we're going to carefully pop back, and there are some wires crossing between the front and the back. Nice thing is we can get to these quite easily, so that's fine. So we're going to carefully unlatch that one, and then carefully unlatch that one. That allows us then to recover the 2 screws that fell inside when we took it apart. There we go. This is the inside of the radio. We can see we've got a single board, which is nice to see. We've got probably our microcontroller there. We'll zoom in and have a look at that. We've got our ExpressLRS radio up the top here. Okay, looking a bit closer. So in the middle, we have our microcontroller. Now this is a Nation N32G435. So that is going to be running the main operating system. That's what we're going to have there. We've then got our ExpressLRS radio at the top. You can see antenna-wise, we've got 2 antennas showing on this. We've got a little ceramic chip antenna, and then you've got this little PCB antenna. This ceramic chip antenna is going to be for the main ExpressLRS radio. You can see we have what looks to be a power amplifier. We've got another chipset, which is probably our SX12 series, and then we've got our ESP. We'll get that under the microscope to have a look at what they are in a bit more detail in a minute. We've then got some voltage regulation down here, and then there's some sundry components down here. So you got your passives, some transistors, a bit more voltage regulation from the look of it. And then you've got your gimbals on either side, plastic gimbals with Hall effect sensors. So if I just pop them up, you can see there. It's not the easiest thing to see, but there is a Hall sensor on each board. And then you've got your wiring coming through to the front, which is probably for our switches and buttons. I'm not expecting there to be a great deal of circuitry on the other side of the board, but we will, I think, pop out the 4 screws just to go and have a look. Okay, now they're removed. I'm just going to flip the board up to have a quick look. I don't know really if there's a need to completely remove it. No. Okay, so there's basically no circuitry on the side of that board. So I'm not going to undo all of the gimbals and everything, get it out. But what you do have is a wiring harness that goes down to a secondary board, which is for our trim switches as well as our 2 buttons on the front. So they go down to the, oh actually sorry, no, just our trims from the look of it. Our trims and our, yeah, no, just our trims, because the buttons on the front go to the buttons on the PCB there, and then you've got your trim switches above it, and then the LEDs at the top, they go down to the main board as well through a light guide. So yeah, pretty much just that. As you can see, the main switches at the top here are soldered onto the board, so they are not on separate wires. Same as these corner buttons. So if I put a bit of pressure on that, you can see that's actually part of the radio, and then it pushes onto a momentary button on either corner. So if you did want to replace them, they're soldered to the board. Just quickly jumping under the microscope, there you have the main SoC. So that's that Nation N32G435. So ARM-based SoC, which is going to be running their custom OS. And then if we hop up to the ExpressLRS system, we will start with the main chipset, which is an ESP8285, which is absolutely fine. That then goes to an SX1281, pretty standard, 2.4 gigs ExpressLRS system, power amplifier, and then that heads out to our chip antenna there. So based on all of that, as I mentioned earlier, that chip antenna is what's going to be for the main ExpressLRS system, and then that little PCB track is going to be the built-in Wi-Fi functionality for the ESP32. Overall, a pretty basic, simple, straightforward radio, but it has everything it needs to do the job. Okay, so my thoughts on the T8L. Now, obviously, this isn't a radio that's going to suit everyone. There's no menu system. It's not Edge TX. It's not configurable in itself. There's no Bluetooth here or things like that. You're going to need to plug it into your PC. But this is an incredibly cheap radio. As I said at the start, the international dollar pricing is going to be $34.99, US $39.49 with the tariffs, EU €41.99 euros, and UK £34.99. That really does put it in the bottom end, but it certainly doesn't feel like a bottom end radio. It is the best radio of this price point I have felt. The plastics are really nice, the gimbals are good. It isn't perfect. As I've said, I found the switches a bit of a reach, and I would rather it did have an external antenna rather than that chip, but man, what a radio for the money. And honestly, if you're considering getting yourself a DJI system and you've been thinking about this, don't buy this. Start with this. Obviously, this might not give you quite the same range as this because this uses the O4 system, but it's a great starting point, and you can then upgrade to a normal ExpressLRS radio if you want to. You can then use it for sim use, a backup radio in the bag. What is not to like, not only at that price point, but it takes full 18650s as well. Again, it's hard to really say anything bad when we're talking sub $30 internationally. Now, when it comes to this radio compared to other ExpressLRS radios, it's hard to do a bit of a comparison. Really, as I've said already, there's no external configuration on this, so that's going to be a bit of a pain point in the field if you need to. And just take into account that that internal chip antenna is not going to give you the same performance as a big external antenna like you might have on the Pocket or any of those other radios. This is certainly not designed to be a direct alternative to them. It is a budget radio, so just take into account that there will be a compromise on range simply as a result of that built-in chip antenna. But again, at this price point, we shouldn't expect the same kinds of performance that you're going to get from an $80, $90, $100 Pocket. But what this does do is get you into the ecosystem at an amazing price point and a good radio at that price point as well. Now, if you're interested in getting one, there will be a link to it in the description. That will be an affiliate link from Radiomaster. I just want to say a big thank you to Radiomaster for sending it over. They are one of the only brands now that we use affiliate links with. If you found this video interesting, please do consider also checking out the links to my Patreon as well as buy me a coffee. It is only through the support of my Patreons we're able to keep making content on this channel. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content in the future, check it out. I want to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreons. We would not be able to do this without your support. In the end, cheap, good, and what's not to like, ExpressLRS. Look after yourself, stay safe. I will speak to you soon.